Welcome to the Maverick Paradox podcast, where we explore what it is to be a maverick and discover effective modes of leadership. I am Judith Germain, and my mission is to propel the maverick mindset into a world where character and integrity will ultimately have a higher premium than personality and bureaucracy. So thank you for joining me on this journey. If you'd like to continue with me, then please subscribe to my podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, or one of the other popular podcast platforms. And today, my guest is Lubna Forzley. Hi, Lubna.
Hi, it's great to be on.
Yeah, it's good to have you.
Thank you.
I thought today we would talk about why leaders must have purpose and how can they instill that into other people. Does that sound okay?
That sounds wonderful. Yes.
Brilliant. So, what do you think?
So I think, I'd say why not? I mean, how could you not have purpose? Because I think first and foremost, as individuals, there's no accident in the world. We're here for a reason. God placed us here for a reason, and I think it's so important to make use of that reason every single day we can to live our purpose and to work with purpose. So I really think it's so important for leaders to do that for themselves, for their families, but more importantly for their corporations, because at the end of the day, we follow leaders because of what they stand for, because of the purpose they have. We don't follow them because of the products they sell. And if you look at the companies that have done really, really well in life, it's the companies that actually have a purpose and that communicate their purpose, and the companies that have a leader that has a purpose. So somebody like, Apple and Steve Jobs, for example, there's a reason why they were successful or they are successful. It's because they had a purpose and they communicated that clearly, and Steve Jobs had a purpose and communicated that clearly. So I think it's so important to do that. I'd say it's one of the most important things in life.
Yeah, so do you think it's required to have more than just a purpose, that it needs to be narrated in a way that people can understand it? You think that's the difference?
Absolutely. I mean, having a purpose without the ability to communicate it and articulate it doesn't help. I think if you're able to articulate that better and communicate it with your target audience, then obviously you end up doing better. But I think, there are maybe people that have lived with purpose that don't necessarily articulate that purpose in words, but articulate it more in actions. So Mother Teresa is a perfect example of that. I think, she didn't go out of her way to market herself, but her actions did, right? So I think it's living with purpose online and offline, living with purpose every single day, letting your values and your purpose guide you and guide your decisions, guide the way you live. I think that's what's most important. And I think that usually shines through people's character in their toughest times. It's when you're at your lowest ever in life that your purpose shines through and that your values shine through, because it's your ability to stick to these that actually shows whether you genuinely live by that purpose or don't.
That makes sense. So I notice you're the MD of story, so I'm assuming that the best way to get your purpose out there is via storytelling.
I think it's one of the ways. I'd say it's not. I mean, I don't want to sort of be biased and say it's the best way, but I'd say it's one of the best ways, because I think at the end of the day, I was raised during the war, and the reason why I called my company Stories is because I really believe that on our deathbed, the only thing we have is the story we leave behind. We don't take away with us neither the money that we've accumulated, nor the beautiful clothes, nor the home that we've bought, nothing. I mean, it's all gone. And the only thing that remains is the purpose that you live, the impact that you make, the story that you have. And I really, really think that it's so important for every leader to have that, and for every company to also have that. And that's why I called it Stories. I'm sorry, maybe I went off topic. Did you ask me? Did I answer that?
No, it's fine. But it did lead me to thinking, actually, what's the elements of a good story when you're talking about purpose? What makes a great story?
I think one of the most important elements of storytelling is connecting with your audience. It's actually being authentic, finding out who your audience is, what their pain points are, what solution you can provide to that pain point, and making sure you communicate your story in a way that actually delivers on this and resonates with them. People connect with people at the end of the day. And so if you're able to find a story that connects with the individual that you're talking to, that's when you create a bond, an engagement, a stronger connection. There are many other elements of storytelling, but I'd say, this is the most important one.
Okay, so how do you instill purpose in others? Is it possible to do that?
I think you can bring others along the journey with you. I think everybody has purpose first and foremost. So can another individual instill purpose in another? I mean, that purpose already exists, right? So what another individual can do to you is they can help you find that, because purpose is a hard thing to find. And so what an individual can do is help another person find their purpose, help another person communicate their purpose. But you can't, I don't believe that you instill purpose in another, because that person, every person has purpose built into them. They just need to dig deep and find it, and then communicate it. But what leaders can do is that they can communicate their own purpose and their company's purpose. And then they can find individuals that are able to connect with that purpose. And that's when the magic happens. I'm a big believer in Simon Sinek and his Start With Why movement. Mm-hmm. And Simon Sinek, says it's all about communicating the why rather than the what. And he always, believes that a company should find individuals that share a common purpose with the company, because when you do that, then that employee ends up more loyal, ends up working more effectively. So essentially what you want is something like a tree where the root of the tree is the purpose, but then you're connecting with teams. You have teams that are working within your organization that have a shared vision, and then individuals that are part of that team that also share the vision and the purpose of the team, but also the purpose of the company as well. Have that, you have a more engaged organization. I think the biggest disease today is that 80%, according to a study, I think it's 80 or 86% of the workforce is unengaged. And that's because, some companies are not showing their purpose, and they're not treating employees in a way where they care about the employees' why. When you care about the employees' why, the employee is going to give you more and care about you more.
Yes, I think that's totally right, and I think some of the errors that organisations can make is defining their own purpose in a small group, maybe the board or the leadership team, and then trying to force that purpose onto other people, and then wondering why the workforce isn't as engaged as it could be.
Mm-hmm. The best way to get an engaged workforce is to actually care about your workforce's why, and to care about your workforce's success and future. Because when you care about when you invest in them, I always say that maybe because I'm a parent and parenting has changed me, but when you're a parent and you have kids, you care about your kids' future, you care about your kids' success. And leaders can do the same. If some of the best roles I've ever had in my life were the roles where I've consulted for a company where the CEO actually cared about me, or where I've worked in a company where the actual CEO genuinely cared about my future, genuinely cared about me, and showed me that in action. And that's when I actually cared 10 times more and showed him or her back in action that I wanted their best, because they wanted my best.
Yeah, why do you think not enough CEOs or senior leaders genuinely care?
I don't think it's ill-intentioned. I think, everybody's under so much pressure to get that bottom line. And so because they're under a lot of time pressure, because they're under a lot of financial pressure, and they're working really, really hard, they just want the result. They want the employee to produce the result. And because they want the employee to produce the result really, really fast, the conversation between the employer and the employee tends to just focus on the results rather than, hey, how are you today? What's your challenge, or what's happening with you, and how can I be of help to you? How can I serve you? And when you change that conversation and change the dynamics of the conversation, I think the employee will give you the result. They will. It's just, it would be nice to show a little care, because when you do, you get a better result, in my view.
Yes, that makes a lot of sense. I noticed that you've been called, or your company's been called, the Corporate Super Nanny. What does that mean?
I've called myself that, and the reason why I've called myself that is because when I became a mom and I started my own company at the same time. Or actually, I became a mom of my third child and I started my company at the same time. And my home was just so chaotic, to be honest. And I thought, if I could only have the super nanny come and just sit with me and tell me, what am I doing wrong? Like, well, what's going on in my house? And I actually ended up hiring her and interviewing her on video, and I'll be sharing these on LinkedIn very soon. But I just thought it's such a cool concept to go into a company and observe what's happening in that company, and basically work hand in hand with the CEO to give the CEO tips on how he or she can make their company run in a more effective way, specifically also of marketing and storytelling, given my expertise, and culture and corporate culture, because these two go hand in hand. And I thought it would be really cool to go in and just kind of transform a company's story, and do that from the inside out, starting with the culture all the way out to the way they communicate that story externally with their consumers.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Do you actually call yourself a corporate super nanny? Because I wonder how people react to that.
So I do on LinkedIn, and I do sometimes in certain meetings. I don't go out of my way to promote that, to be honest. But I think people find it really cool. I think, the parents who have watched the Super Nanny show are automatically hooked on it, and they're like, oh my God, it's kind of a conversation started. They're like, oh my God, I need the Super Nanny in my home. And it kind of starts the conversation. So those that have kids kind of get it.
Yeah.
And there are some people who just don't really get it, and they ask me what it is, and I explain it to them. And I think, the best way to explain it to them is sometimes companies hire agencies, and these agencies come in and give them ready-made solutions that they kind of copy paste sometimes from other pitches. And I don't do that. What I do is I actually go into a company and I observe what's happening in their organization, and I tell them the hard truth. I think the most important element of being a super nanny is I tell them the truth in their face, and it just takes a CEO that actually wants to hear that, like a parent that's actually desperate, that actually needs the help and wants to hear the hard truth. And not everybody's ready for that. So the best skill that I've been able to bring into this corporate storytelling approach is that I'm just so honest and genuine, and I just say the truth. So I'm like a truth teller, not just a storyteller. And I think that works sometimes, and sometimes it doesn't.
I think there's nothing wrong with being a truth teller. And we need more of that in leadership for sure.
Yeah, for the people, some people are not ready for it though, right? So
yes.
You kind of need to accompany people who are ready for it.
So if somebody says, I need to change my corporate culture, then how would you do that? What's the best way of doing that? in terms of
You know,
alignment?
the first thing I do when I'm asked that, and I go into a company and I observe. I start by observing the culture, observing the way people are, interacting with each other, and then I ask two questions, two common questions of most employees that I meet. So the first question is, what are your top three values, and do you know the purpose of the organization and the vision of the organization? And what tends to happen is that I get different answers from different people.
Mm-hmm.
And when I do that, then that's a sign that you as a company or you as a leader you either don't have a clear purpose, or you have a clear purpose and you haven't articulated it properly. Or you have, values that sound nice and look nice on walls, but they're not necessarily lived. And so it's almost, again, like going back to parenting and like leading your home as a parent. When you have clear values and clear rewards and consequences, you're very clear with your kids that these, if you do this, you get this. If you do really well, you're going to get a reward. And if you don't do really well, you're going to get a timeout. It's the same in leadership. Companies need to have clear values and they need to live by these values. If you say that you value honesty, yet you have people who are being dishonest left, right, and center, and you're keeping them because they're generating these results, then that's not, people are going to see through that and they're not going to respect you and they're not going to live by these values. So it's so important that companies live by their values and have rewards and consequences for these values. So the best test of any culture, in my view, is looking at a culture's values, rewards, and consequences.
Yes, that just reminded me of an incident when I was much younger, working for an organisation that had very strong values, or values that they said that they held quite strongly. And then I was in a situation where one of those values was put into conflict, and I watched it play out in front of me, and the HR director and the owner were there in the same space, and they did nothing. And I remember going, "Uh-huh, I think I'll be leaving soon." And it wasn't the fact that the incident itself was that big a deal, but it was more that the values that they kept saying was important. When it came down to someone paying money, they weren't that bothered. And they
Of
looked,
course.
and in that moment, they looked at me, and I looked, and we both knew that it was like this. It was almost like there was this huge fraud. Do you know what I mean? Because they could see I was thinking, I can't believe you're letting this happen based on what you're telling people. Do you know what I mean? It was almost like this kind of huge elephant. Nothing
Absolutely.
was the same after. I was like, yeah, I'm leaving. It didn't even have to, I didn't obviously make a big deal out of it.
And it happens today in every organization, and it's just too bad because you had the courage to leave. There are people who don't have the courage to leave for whatever reason. They either can't afford it financially, or they're not ready at a certain time in their life, or you never know what people's reasons are. But that's why people are unengaged, because they have to sometimes stay in jobs that they don't want to stay at, and because there's a huge value disconnect, but they end up staying because they have to. But I think it's so important when you say you have certain values, that you see through these values in your darkest time, either as an organization or as an individual. And I see this all the time, especially with companies who go on and on and on talking about diversity, and then you look at their practices and their practices show something completely different. But it is what it is. You can only create awareness on it, and I think the companies that are winning in life are those that are, I'd say, living by their values and their purpose more than others.
Yeah, and I think if those two individuals had been honest and had said afterwards, the reason we didn't do X, Y, and Z was because X, Y, then that would have probably compensated. But it was
Absolutely.
a dirty secret. And I think the reason I chose to leave was my own role would mean I would need to espouse and train other people in the values, and I could no longer, in all good honesty,
Right.
I could no longer stand up and say this is what we passionately believe in when I knew it wasn't true. So I wasn't prepared to have my principles compromised.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. That's because you have integrity, and I think integrity and honesty are expensive gifts.
Yes, I agree. And I remember speaking to a consultant friend of mine who said something years ago, and he said that he had noticed that the more companies talked about their values, so if the ones that talked about them constantly tended to be the ones that demonstrated them the least.
Yes,
And
maybe. Yeah.
and I thought that was quite, and I've always been kind of stuck between that, because there are companies that really live their values, but I think the difference is they state them and then live them, but they then go on about them. But so I think what he's saying is the ones that constantly, it's like they constantly talk about values because they don't really have values. So it's almost like that.
Yeah, I understand.
Lie type thing.
It's your actions that actually define your values. It's not talking about them, right?
Yes, exactly. It makes it quite difficult. So, what tip would you give to somebody? So, say someone's setting up a new business and they've started hiring, and they want to ensure that they hire people who have the similar purpose or people who can be aligned to it. Is there any sort of tips that you would give them?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say at the interview stage to make sure that you start by talking about purpose, about where you want to go, and ask them about their purpose, ask them about, what makes them get up every day, why, test their character more than you test their skill. You can train, for skills, but you can't train for character. So just screen before people come in, screen for character, and make sure that you see signs or you hear signs in the conversation that make you believe that that person can actually connect with the purpose of your company. And that's it's easiest done when you're first starting out, and because you're hiring new people. It's harder when you have a large organization and you have people that don't connect well with the organization. But when you're starting out fresh, you're blessed because you have that luxury to actually screen for that. So I'd say start from the beginning and make sure that you have that, and find a way. If I can give you a quick example, I was talking to an owner of a gym, and when he interviews people, he can easily say, "Oh, I'm looking for a gym instructor or whatever, somebody who has lifted weights or whatever." But he doesn't really say that. He says, "My why is to transform people's lives. I want to change people's lives from the minute they walk into my gym to the minute they leave." And he actually does that. And he embodies that in the way he runs his business. And so, and when he looks for people, he makes sure that the people that he's hiring are actually very genuine about seeing people transform. And when you walk into his gym, it's very clear that the trainers who are there actually genuinely care to see you change, succeed. And so this could be applied to any business, to anything. It has nothing to do with certain industries. It has nothing to do with how much money you have or what experience you have. It's just really literally about standing up for something, caring about a purpose, and making sure that you hire people who actually breathe and live the same way.
That makes a lot of sense. And do you think that people should sack a client that doesn't fulfill the purpose that the host company has?
A client?
Yeah, so supposing
if I had a client that didn't, yeah.
Yeah, so you could, could have a client, and then you find out that maybe they're doing something that's illegal, or they have some weird employment practices, or something that you wouldn't be comfortable working for them, but you're there to help them to grow or develop. Or would you make a stand? Do you think people should make a stand and say, you know what, we're just not aligned?
Yeah, I mean, I think every individual should make a stand to live their purpose and to state their values. And I think when you have a client, it's the easiest situation because you can easily leave that client and find another client. It's harder when you're working for an organization, I'd say, because when you're working, that kind of shapes your life, and
Mm,
therefore it's harder to get out of that and start a company or find another job or whatever. But when you actually have a consulting practice and you're working with a client that's not aligned with you, that's sort of an easier thing to do. But yeah, I mean, so in my case, when I work with certain clients, I know that when I go into certain organizations that they're not doing very well, and that's why they hired me. So I can't, I don't necessarily just walk away right
no, of
away.
course.
You know what I mean? Because that's why I'm there. So there have been there have been organizations that I've worked with where things had not been ideal, but I stayed until the end of my term, and I did it with so much love and wholeheartedly. And to this day, I still promote these organizations because I knew that the CEO genuinely wanted change. I knew that the CEO genuinely had purpose. I knew the CEO genuinely wants to make an impact in this world. And so the fact that the CEO had some issues or didn't know how to do certain things is not an issue. That's why they had me there, right?
Of course, yes.
But there were other organizations where, yeah, I mean, somewhere along the journey, I try and it just doesn't click or it doesn't work. And I keep trying and trying and trying until, I usually do my best. I normally stay till the end of the term that we've agreed.
Mm,
And I do my best to actually instill the change. But there are some that I actually, there's one specifically that I say to the CEO, I'll call you, I'm like your super nanny eternally for life, because I believe so much in that company and, in that CEO. And I'll always stay in touch with them. I'll always talk about them. I'll always promote them. But there were others my term. And you know what? We shake hands politely and I move on, and that's it. We go our separate ways.
brilliant. Thank you for that. It probably sounds like a good place to stop now, but I have really enjoyed our conversation, Numna. Would you come back
Thank you.
again another day and do another subject?
Yes, of course, anytime. Yeah, I tend to talk a lot about, um, leadership, about purpose, about storytelling, about finding your why. So any of these topics are fine.
Brilliant. There's a lot to
Or about
explore.
being original and unique. I noticed that you cover that as well,
Yes.
and I think it's so important to be original and unique. I don't know why not enough people do that, but I think it takes a certain level of courage, and
Mm.
I'd love to talk about that one day.
Oh, brilliant. I think we'll do that.
All right, that sounds good.
Thank you once again for tuning into the Maverick Paradox podcast. I hope you have enjoyed listening to my conversation with Lumna as much as I enjoyed having it. If you'd like to learn more about Mavericks and leadership, then please subscribe to my podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, or one of the other popular podcast platforms. Alternatively, apply to join the Maverick Paradox exclusive Facebook group. And my website is maverickparadox.com. Find out how willful independence can ultimately change all our futures. Thanks again, and see you soon.